Hello, everybody. Welcome back to It's Called Football as we preview match week 4 of the Premier League, about to kick off this weekend starting on Friday. Let's get right into the fixtures to come. So, one of the big moments of Matchday 4 shows up right in the very first match as Luton Town host West Ham United. Now, while this might not seem like the biggest match in terms of the teams in play, based on the reputation of certain clubs that we've covered in the past, this is a big moment for Luton Town. They have just made it up to the Premier League. As viewers who've watched our earlier videos will know, it's been a fantastic story where they've made it up through the divisions and are finally in the Premier League. But there was a little bit of a hitch in match day 2, where their home game against Burnley had to be rescheduled because Luton Stadium did not meet the requirements set by the Premier League. Since then, they have been working at it, and this is why this is such a big moment, because Luton is about to have its very first home match in the Premier League. Now, it helps, of course, that it's quite a nice occasion because West Ham have been in fantastic form and they're going to be out to spoil the party for Luton. Make no mistake, as much as Luton's players are going to be enjoying themselves and riding high on the emotion from the fans at being able to play at a home game, West Ham are in great form, coming off the back of two impressive wins against Chelsea and Brighton last weekend. So this is going to be tough, but it should be a good spectacle. Sheffield United face off Everton, both teams on 0 points at the moment. Everton, unfortunately, on 0 goals as well. They will be hoping to get off the mark. Brentford will face off against Bournemouth. Burnley get to play at home against Tottenham Hotspur. And Chelsea will host Nottingham Forest, who so unfortunately lost to Manchester United last weekend. Our other matches see Fulham travel to Manchester City, and then one of the bigger matches of these early weeks as Brighton face off against Newcastle. A little more on that in a bit. Crystal Palace play Wolves in Sunday's first match, followed by Liverpool hosting Aston Villa, and then probably the biggest match of the weekend as Arsenal face off against Manchester United. Just a reminder for you that this is how the Premier League table looks at the moment. Our top half has seen Manchester City, the reigning champions, take first place last weekend and be the only team so far with a perfect record. However, there are teams that are not too far on their tail, so City know that they can't afford to slip up. Arsenal in particular have a lot of pressure as they have a tough match this week and they did drop points that they shouldn't have last weekend. They will want to make sure they don't fall far off the top spot this early in the season. Manchester United, although not quite as high in the table as they would like, are in the top half, and Chelsea, as we mentioned in our match day 3 recap, are enjoying a top spot position right now, or a top half position, excuse me, for the first time in months. There are other teams here who will be hoping to keep up their momentum so far. Brighton and Aston Villa have been impressive, and West Ham obviously have done very well so far given the tough opponents they've been up against. Our bottom half sees Crystal Palace, Fulham, Newcastle, and Nottingham all who will want to try and move up the table. Wolves at the moment are in a decent position with their win at Everton last weekend, but they will want to build on that as well so that they don't fall back into that unwanted race of being in those bottom 3 spots. Burnley and Luton Town have a big challenge on their hands. And of course, Sheffield United currently sitting above the bottom 3 spots, but could fall into those spots if Everton beat them this weekend. Everton, I think they have to have their priority as scoring a goal first and foremost, and then worry about shutting out Sheffield. So we'll see what happens in these fixtures. There are two featured matches that we recommend you try to tune in for this weekend if you're able to. The first of which is on Saturday, which we mentioned as Brighton face off against Newcastle. Both teams suffered uh, surprising defeats, shall we say, given the circumstances and the way the matches were going and what was expected of these two teams. It was very surprising that neither of them came out with a win, and both of them will be looking to set things right as they face each other. The second match is on Sunday, as we said, as Arsenal host Manchester United. This fixture used to be the absolute pinnacle of Premier League rivalry uh, about a couple of decades ago, when these two sides would always be contesting for the league title. Both of them are a little bit away from that at the moment, and perhaps that spark in this fixture has gone away a bit in recent years. But both teams are improving and back on the up, and there were signs last season that this fixture is starting to have the flame it used to. So some of our big stories that we would recommend you kind of keep an eye out for going into the games. As we mentioned, Luton Town have finally got their home stadium ready with the necessary upgrades as the Premier League required, and they will be hoping that their first home match in their Premier League adventure ends up with at least avoiding defeat against West Ham, who have started very strongly. Like we say, West Ham do stand in their way. David Moyes, the manager that you see there on the right of that bottom picture, he masterminded a very, very impressive 3-1 win away at Brighton last weekend. And since then, they have strengthened their ranks with the signing of Mohamed Kudus, a Ghanaian attacking player uh, who has come from Ajax, a Dutch football club. If Kudus plays this weekend, we're not sure yet, but he has joined West Ham and is definitely going to add to their attacking talent. Brighton's manager, Roberto De Zerbi, was stunned at how his team dominated the match against West Ham last weekend and yet ultimately came away with no points to show for it, having been beaten basically on the counter-attack with three very well worked goals from West Ham. Newcastle, similarly under Eddie Howe, uh, also perhaps suffered from perhaps complacency or lack of concentration as they allowed Liverpool, who had a man fewer than themselves, to come back and beat them at their own home ground. With Brighton and Newcastle both suffering home defeats last weekend, they will both be raring to go, stung, and wanting to set things right this time. Should be a very, very interesting match to watch. And then finally, the big match of the weekend, the one with probably the most hype around it, is Arsenal and Manchester United as Mikel Arteta goes off against Eric Ten Hag. We've spoken about both these managers before and what they're doing with their various clubs. They have both made excellent progress. Arsenal especially were highlighted last season for their strong title charge, which ultimately fell away at the end of the season, but they impressed a lot of viewers. And this fixture ended 3-2 to Arsenal last season in a very end-to-end fiery match which started to show signs of the old rivalry reigniting again. Ultimately, this match at Arsenal's home ground last season was decided by a 90th minute winner from one of their strikers, their backup striker actually, in Eddie Nketiah. Speaking of the players at these two clubs, Bukayo Saka, who has just been named a couple of days ago as the Professional Footballers Association Young Player of the Year from last season. He's been in good form this season so far as well, and he will be looking to make his mark against United. He scored an excellent goal against them in the 3-2 fixture I mentioned earlier. He will be hoping to do so again this time against them. Eddie Nketiah is another player who potentially will make a difference in this game. He scored the other 2 goals for Arsenal in that 3-2 win last season, and he's been in great form this season as well. He's scored twice and he won the penalty against Crystal Palace, which ultimately led to the winning goal in that match as well. Although he is the second choice striker at Arsenal, there are concerns that their first choice, Gabriel Jesus, may not be fully fit to start the match, and so perhaps he won't be risked. In which case, Eddie Nketiah will have a point to prove again and will hopefully continue his good form for Arsenal. He has also just received his very first call to the England squad for the upcoming international break, which happens right after this set of fixtures is done in the Premier League. United have players like Marcus Rashford who can make a difference in an attacking sense. He's not their only attacking threat, of course. Bruno Fernandes is another one. However, they are suffering from quite a litany of injuries at the moment. They're one of their strongest centre backs in Raphael Varane, French international formerly. He's been ruled out recently for potentially about 6 weeks. It could be fewer. Remains to be seen exactly how long he's out for, with an injury he picked up in their last match in the win against Nottingham Forest. Meanwhile, their left back, first choice, Luke Shaw, has been ruled out for about 10 weeks now, which will mean that we are unlikely to see him actually back in action for United until late November, maybe mid-December is kind of what United will be expecting and hoping they can see him by. Obviously, we hope that the injured players make their way back as soon as possible, but with both of them out of this fixture, United won't have their first choice defence available to deal with Arsenal's attack. Whether that gives Arsenal a very clear edge remains to be seen, as both squads possess a lot of quality, even with injured players or first choice players not necessarily fully fit or available. There is a lot at stake in this fixture, and like we said, both teams will be wanting to make sure they at least maintain where they are in the table, if not moving up. So let's go over some of our predictions for this weekend's set of fixtures. Personally, I think that although Luton is going to be riding high on their home game and the ability to play at their own ground again, I think that West Ham is going to prove themselves too strong, and they are going to end up winning this one 3-1. Sheffield United and Everton is a difficult one to predict. Sheffield has shown against Manchester City last week that they can face off against the best. They know how to be dogged in defense. Everton are struggling, but it is time for them to wake themselves up. And I think they are going to get their first goal of the season, but ultimately Everton won't be able to win. I think Sheffield United will get a draw. 1-1 out of this one is my prediction. Brentford have looked quite good in all their games so far. They haven't lost yet. Bournemouth have lost 2 out of their 3 matches so far, and I do think that they're going to lose this one as well, although it might be a little closer, and I think Brentford will come out 2-1 in this game. Burnley did very well in the division below the Premier League last season, but since they've come up, they haven't exactly been too impressive. Now, admittedly, they've only played 2 matches, but losing to Manchester City the way they did wasn't overly impressive, although obviously against the reigning champions, being a new team in the division, you're not going to necessarily expect that you will beat them. But they weren't impressive against Aston Villa last weekend either. Tottenham Hotspur, or Spurs, on the other hand, have looked excellent in pretty much all their games so far, and I think that they are pretty much going to blow Burnley away in this game. They are very strong right now. They're in a good run of form. And although they got knocked out of a cup competition in midweek, I do think Spurs will bounce back and get a comfortable win here. Chelsea are a strange side at the moment, losing to West Ham, but then quite dominant against Luton. Obviously, we take it with a grain of salt because of Luton's inexperience at the top division. And Forest have played well, but I do think Chelsea at home are starting to find their groove just a little bit, and they will use that to come out on top of this game. Fulham last weekend against Arsenal would not really have come away with anything if it weren't for individual mistakes from Arsenal players that gifted goals. I don't see Manchester City doing anything like that. I don't think that they will make the kind of mistakes that will gift Fulham goals. And at the other end, we know that with players like Erling Haaland, Phil Foden, and Bernardo Silva, they have goal threats all over the place. I think Manchester City are going to have a comfortable victory before this international break and win 4-0. Brighton and Newcastle will both be going at it. They will be out to prove their doubters wrong and get back on the right track. Ultimately, however, I do think that their strengths and weaknesses are just going to come to blows and they will cancel each other out in a 2-2 draw. Palace started off strongly with a win in their opening match, but since then have drawn, and they perhaps need a little bit more of a boost, and playing at home again is probably the best way to do that. Although Wolves did win their last match, their previous run of form in the league was not that amazing and nothing to write home about. I do think Palace is going to take this match at home, and they will probably ride on the support of the crowd and depend on that to help them get over the line, but they will win this match, I think, 2-1. Liverpool are starting to look good, and their comeback against Newcastle last weekend was incredibly impressive. To come back with a man down, their manager made the right substitutions and masterminded really the victory that they ended up getting. They will be buoyed by that, and they will absolutely be looking to keep that momentum going. Aston Villa did beat Burnley last weekend away, and they have looked good aside from their opening weekend thrashing at the hands of Newcastle. I think in this case, Liverpool are going to end up being too strong for Aston Villa. Now, the big match, Arsenal and United, has a history of strange results. Sometimes one team will blow the other out of the water. Sometimes it's a match that's a lot closer than it should be. And sometimes freak results happen that there was just no way of predicting. I think, unfortunately, this might be one of those uh, types of matches. Arsenal has so much in their favor with their attack being prolific right now and United having defensive problems. And somehow I think that that might uh, make United work a little bit harder and play to a level they might not have hit yet this season. I think strangely, United is going to come out of this on top in a 2-1 win, even though Arsenal have got a lot going for them. As an Arsenal fan myself, I would love for that to be wrong. But I have just a gut instinct that something like this is going to happen, and hopefully the Arsenal players make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen in the match. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. Thanks for sticking with us through this entire one. I know it's a bit longer than some of our other ones, but there are some very tasty matchups to tune in for if you are able to this weekend. Thanks again for listening. Leave your predictions in the comments below, and please like the video, share it with other people, and subscribe to the channel if you found any of what we talked about interesting, useful, or entertaining. It would really help out the channel if you liked and subscribed. Thanks, and just remember, it's called football.